Tonight's first tutorial is with Kuba for Photoshop. It's the first in a series of tutorials, so I'll pass you over to Kuba.
Thanks, man. Just before we start, just a few things. I'm not going to go through the very basics, like the way layers work or basic tools in Photoshop. Richie probably would have done that with you already. But I'm just going to show a few sort of techniques and tools you can use to make rendering quite easy, if a bit time consuming. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. When I've done it a few days ago, it took me about an hour and a half, but it'll probably be a bit quicker than that since this is not the first time. So if you want to follow along, as Glenn mentioned already, you can download the file from the Google Drive, and that's got all the textures and all the images that I'll be using to render the image, as well as the Photoshop starting file, Esherick start over there, which has a few layers on it already. So we've got a base shape mask, so it's going to be especially useful for when we're rendering the background, so that the background's not sort of showing through the building. I've got Esherick base, and so that's the basic outline of the building. This is taken from a SketchUp model, which is quite a good thing to do as well. It gives you that 3D sort of depth that you can't really get from an AutoCAD file. And then obviously you've got the shadow layer as well, which is going to come in handy later on when we're sort of getting to that stage. So yeah, this is a starting point. Where we want to be at the end of the session is something like this, just a nighttime render, some stuff going on there, a bit of background work, some lighting going on as well, some shading in there. Shouldn't be too bad. So first of all, we're going to start laying in the textures. There are two ways to do this. You can either use masks or you can use patterns. Masks are useful, but I find them a bit awkward to work. So I much prefer using patterns. So the way you create a pattern is if you go into the folder and you get the render texture 1. I'm going to open it up as a separate file in Photoshop. There we go. Can you see that? Yeah. So obviously that's just an image now. But what we can do is if you go to edit, you can press define pattern. You've got render texture 1. It's going to press OK. And that's now a pattern. So if I go into the patterns menu, which is just at the bottom there with a little black and white circle, if you press pattern, that is now on the list in there. Close that down now. Right, so we don't need shadows just now. So we're gonna lay down the render pattern on the building. So if you just use the magic wand tool, if it's simple line work like that, magic wand is a bit of a saving grace there. If you just click, it just fills out the entire area. Just make sure you've got clean outlines and there's no breaks in there, because sometimes if, for example, in the corner your line doesn't, maybe I'll show that, if your line doesn't quite go to the edge, if you've got a little break like that, it's quite hard to notice. It'll just fill up the entire screen. Right, let me just do that there. Okay, so I've selected these 3 areas here, which are obviously in the building. They're rendered in plaster. I'll just fill these areas here as well. Right, so if you go to the little circle again and go into patterns, you'll see it's applied a render pattern onto the building just now. It looks a bit big, so obviously we'll put down the scale a little bit, 30%. Looks about right. Leave it at 10%. And I've noticed as well, there's some bits, which is fine. Just going to fill them in as well. So again, in the past, I'm at 10%, just to keep the size the same. So when you're using patterns, it's good to look for textures which are they're seamless, because a lot of the times, if you're just using a photo, you're going to see all the joints in between the patterns show up, because the way it does is just paste the image over in a series. Can look quite bad sometimes. Another bit here. Okay. So obviously we've got 3 layers, don't need that many, so I'm going to merge them. We'll call it. Now, this is going to get quite a few layers on it, so it's a good habit to sort of label them in colours. Easier to find them after you've got 50 layers or whatever. That as well. Okay, let's look at the shadows. It looks pretty good. The render pattern is a little bit too dark, so what we're going to do is we're going to apply an adjustment layer. They're pretty useful when it comes to textures like that. If you want to change the color, or if you want to change the contrast and brightness of them. So let me just maybe hue and saturation. Now, so once you've got the adjustment layer there, what you can do is, if you hold down, I believe it's Alt on PCs, I'm using a Mac, so it's Option for me. So if you hold that, you're getting this little icon. Now, if you click it in between the adjustment layer and the layer that you want to assign to, it's going to assign it to that layer and that layer only. If you don't do that, what it's going to do is it's going to apply it to the entire image. So, for example, if I don't apply it and try to increase lightness, it does it to the entire image, the outline as well, which is, we don't want that. So if I assign it to the render pattern, now if I increase the lightness, you can see it only does it to the texture that we want to make lighter. That looks about right. I'm going to add a little bit of a blue hue because it's a nighttime scene. Yeah, so as you can see, that's sort of changing it a little bit. The reason I'm doing it this way instead of sort of adjusting the image itself is because you can edit it later on. So if you find that, for example, once you've got 50 layers on and it's almost a finished image, and you want to change the lightness or whatever, you can do that very easily. Okay, we'll add the other textures now really quick. So this area of the building is rendered in wood. So I'm going to add a wood texture as well. As I'm clicking onto these things, I'm holding Shift, which means that instead of creating a new selection, it adds to the one you've already got on. Basic stuff. here. As well. Right, I've already got the texture installed, but obviously you won't have it, so you just do the same thing as I did with the previous one. So just pop the file into there, edit, define pattern, and it will be in there. Let me just add it on. So take that as a texture there. Also a little bit big, so I'm going to decrease the scale a little bit. Looks about right. Missed a few bits, but that's not an issue. Add the pattern to that as well. Looks about right. Okay. Again, we don't want that many layers, so we can just merge them together. Okay, so again, that's a bit dark. So I'll add a hue and saturation adjustment layer onto it as well. I'm going to play that with the options there. Increase the saturation a little bit. And now if you pop the shadows on, you can see it's leaving because it's a layer that's above it, it's leaving this grey colour on it, which we obviously don't want. It looks pretty bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the blending modes, which is probably the tool that I'll be using the most. So it's just at the top of the layer tab over there. At the moment it's sitting at normal, which means it's just an image pasted on top of it. But if you click the little arrow next to it and you go down, got all these different blending modes. So what that's going to do is that's going to blend that layer with everything that's underneath it. So you get anything from hue, saturation, luminosity, which is quite good for shadows as well, but it's not looking very good this time. Multiply is looking quite good, so I'm going to apply that and I'm going to leave it at 100%. It's looking quite good. Right, so that's obviously now working with the textures that are already in there. It's looking quite good. It gives that a little bit of depth. I just noticed as well, missed a little bit at the top when it comes to the render patterns. I'm just going to add that in real quick. Just about 20%. There we go. Right, looking pretty good. So what we're going to do now is going to work on the background. So that mask at the bottom there is going to come in handy. Let me just change that real quick. Okay. So if you go into the folder again, there's a file called grass field. I'm going to add that on. Oh, in fact, I forgot to remove the background from the actual files. So I'm going to go into the Esrig base. So at the moment, you can see that in the little thumbnail in there. It's got a white background around it. So just going to use the magic wand, delete it, Same with the ship mask doesn't have it. So now if I drop the grass field in, it should, there we go. So that's showing up there pretty well. So we want this to have a little bit of depth going on. So I'm going to let the grass field expand sort of past the building to give it that sort of sense of it's stretching sort of behind as well. I'm going to apply that. And obviously that doesn't look very nighttime. So we're going to do the same thing again with adjustment layers with hue and saturation, see how that goes. Attach it to the file with Alt. Make it a bit darker, a little bit of a hue. Can do as well as we can play with levels. So look, levels. Make it a little bit darker as well. A bit too saturated. It's just about playing around, seeing what looks better. A bit more of a blue hue. Looking all right. Look better once we add the sky as well. I'll go that red for the background. As well, if you've got any questions as I go along, just fire them through in the chat and I'll just answer them as I go. All right. Next, we're going to add the sky in as well. Just going to extend it past. Just so it fills up the whole page. Move the shape mask over the background images just so that it covers it up a little bit. Okay, so the sky on its own looks a little bit like it's pasted in. So we want to make it look a bit more like it actually belongs there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer just above it, and I'm going to create a gradient over it so that it's got a little bit of a more simpler look. You don't want it to sort of distract you from the main bit of the piece. So let me just add a gradient in. I'm going to have to change the colors first. So if you go into the bottom left, that's your colours. And Photoshop uses those colours for everything, whether it's a brush or whether it's an image, a gradient for an image like that. So what we can do is we can just take the colours from the sky here. That looks better. And then these colours, and make it a bit more orange, just so that there is a bit of an orange hue going on there. So we want a linear gradient. The gradient tool is just in here. Let's see, basics. We want to go from the dark blue to the orange in there. Let's see. So if you drag, so you click and drag for the gradient, and the direction in which you drag, that's going to form the line of the gradient. probably want the orange hue to be a little bit smaller than that. There we go. That looks about right. So obviously that's covering up this whole sky. Don't want that. So again, we're using the blending options in there, just to give it that gradient overlay. Let's see, screen. Nope. Like the multiply bit, that looks quite good. Reduce the opacity just a little bit. Okay, that looks all right. So I'm going to add some trees in the background as well. And the rule that I try to follow with trees is, or any background element like mountains or a city or whatever, is the further away something is, the lighter the opacity, and it gives you that little bit of depth. And I've just noticed I didn't put a forest file in there. It's okay. Right, there we go. So we got a little image of a forest we can put in the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it out just so that it goes all the way there. I'm going to remove the white background from it. Now, you could just use the magic wand tool, but that wouldn't fill all the gaps in the trees. It would look pretty awful. Rasterize it as well. There we go. Yeah, it looks pretty awful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use color range instead. So if you go into select and go into color range, select the white background, what that does, it selects basically everything of that color within the image and takes it out. You can sort of increase how much it takes away. So I would probably take away the entire image because everything's got a bit of white in it. That looks about right. Okay, and then if you just delete that, it looks a bit better. What you want is, you don't necessarily need these gaps, but what you want is the gaps sort of towards the top, so that the forest kind of dissolves as you go up. And there's some edges on there as well. I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. All right. So that on its own, not really good enough. It looks pretty awful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to control and click on the thumbnail there, and that selects the entire image. And I want this to be a silhouette. So what I can do is I can go into the black and white circle down there again and select solid color. And that's going to turn it into, it's going to fill that area that we just selected with a color. So I want it to be black. I can delete that now. And put it all the way to the back. There we go. A little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reduce the opacity of the image, just so that it recedes a little bit more into the background. Right. Now we want this to have a little bit more depth. So pretty cheap trick, but it'll do the job. Is I'll just copy it, and I'm going to flip it. So edit, transform, flip horizontal. Make it a bit smaller. Increase the opacity so that it looks like it's in front. Okay. Copy it. copy it over. You can delete these things now because bad. That looks pretty all right. Now the building kind of stands out, not in a good way. It's a bit too light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another adjustment layer. I'm going to make it a hue and saturation layer. Okay. I'm going to adjust it a little bit, reduce the saturation, reduce lightness. Okay. And I'm going to attach it to base. In fact, what we can do, that's not really working. So what I'll do is I'll put the entire building in a group. So then when I attach the adjustment layer to the group, it should affect all the patterns in the line work all at once. So if I just select the shadows and the base, group layers, it's going to call it house. Okay. So I'm going to add a hue and saturation layer. So now if I reduce that, there we go. So that's applied it to the house only, into all the layers all at once. Play about with it a little bit. Okay. Now you'll notice we've got some windows in the background as well. So if I get the magic wand tool and go into base, I'm going to delete those windows just so that you can see through them and see the background. So just really quickly with the magic wand. Delete that, and holding the same selection as here, I'm going to go into the black and white circle again, get solid color, and I'm going to choose black, and I'm going to use blending modes to make that look like the image behind. It's sort of behind the window. Let me see. Overlay. Maybe if I change it to white, that might look a bit better. There we go. Good. I'm going to add a bit of shadow underneath the house here, just so that it sits in the landscape a bit more. So you can do that with just a brush and create a new layer. Put it maybe underneath the base. Obviously, with just a flat brush like that, it probably wouldn't look that good. But what you can do is you can make the brush full of perspective. So if you click into the brush icon up there, you've got this little circle, and you can manipulate that to follow a perspective or a direction if it's already different shapes. I'm just going to put it down like that so it looks like I'm drawing on the ground. I'm just going to put a bit of shadow underneath it. And change the blending mode so that it doesn't just look like I drew black colour all over it. Let's see. Looks pretty good. See, once it's drawn on, you can edit it still with a soft eraser. Just the opacity of it. Just so that the shadow's a bit more subtle. There we go, that looks much better. Okay, so there is a little cobblestone area in front of the house, which would be quite good to have as well. So should be in the folder as opposed to the forest in the background. Let's see, it's the cobblestone.png. So if you drop that into your file, it's just a simple cobblestone texture. What we're going to do is we're going to make the scale a bit more manageable. So I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And then if you hold, again, I believe it's Alt, on mine it's Option. If you hold Option, the cursor changes. And now if you click and drag, it's going to copy that image over, which is much quicker than just doing it with Control-C, Control-V and trying to move it again. So I'm just going to copy that, join it together. It's a seamless texture. It should look pretty good once it's done. There we go. So we've got 4 copies of that photo now. Going to merge them together. Again, copy it over here. Merge them again. A little bit smaller. And copy it again. So that's the cobblestone. Right, so obviously on its own, it's pretty flat. It doesn't look that good. So what we're going to do is we're going to warp it to perspective. And there's a tool for that in Photoshop that makes it pretty easy. Let's go Perspective Warp, and you can find it in the Edit tab. So if I do that, you've got 2 buttons up there, Layout and Warp. So you're going to want to draw a rectangle around it, which makes it into a grid. And then if you click onto Warp, that's going to change that into a warp tool now. So if you drag that in a little bit, it's going to distort the image so that it looks like it's in perspective. So we want to make it look like it's sort of following the perspective of the entire image. It doesn't need to be perfect, just as long as it looks about right, it should be okay. Cool. Right, gonna put it underneath our mask. There we go. Move up a little bit so that it looks like it extends over behind the house. And I believe it's semicircular. So we're just gonna use the lasso tool just in there. Polygonal one is probably the most versatile. So just gonna trace around it just so that it has that shape. Let's put that. Again, doesn't need to be exact, just as long as it looks right. That was pretty bad. Another thing that you could do is use the marquee tool to select a bit of it. So, drag it from here. That's all right. Now, obviously, the bit you select is the bit you want to keep. So you want to delete everything else. To do that, just hold Control Shift and the letter I, and that's going to invert the selection. So that's now selected everything that's outside the circle that you've just drawn. So if I just click delete, it deletes everything that's outside that bit over there. Still not looking right. Just a bit better. Draw that on. Good. And Control Shift I, delete. And that's much better. Might want to fix those corners as well. There we go. That looks all right. There we go. Right, so we're going to draw a shadow around it now, just so that it looks a little bit more like it's embedded into it. I'll just move that up a little bit. That's better. So draw a shadow again. Just going to use the brush tool with black colour selected. I don't need the perspective on the brush now. Just going to go around. A lot of the times those things look a bit crude until you're finished, basically. It doesn't need to be super regular. We're going to adjust it with the lasso tool once it's done, just so that the shadow's got a bit of sharpness to it as well. And that's it. With the lasso tool. Trace around just to give a bit of an edge. There we go. And I'm going to change the blending mode on that one, just so that it looks a bit more like an actual shadow. So it looks good. Continue multiplying again, but reduce the opacity a little bit. There we go. That's okay. Just going to adjust some stuff here. looks okay. All right, now it still looks like it's sort of sitting on top of the grass, which is probably not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw around it with a grass brush, which is also in the folder that's on Google Drive. So if you go into brushes, which is just on here, brushes, and go into the menu in there, you can import your own brushes, which you can find online pretty much anywhere. It's the .abr file, which is in the folder. So you can just add that on. I've already got it on, so I'm going to do it. And then you'll find it probably somewhere towards the bottom of the list. Okay, so we're going to choose a brush that looks all right. Let's have a look. And that looks pretty good. And if you go into the colour in bottom left again, double click it, and it's going to pull this around. And when you just hover over the image, it's going to present you a colour picker. So you just pick the colour of the grass, maybe a slightly darker tone. That's about right. And what we're going to do is put in a layer and just draw over it to sort of have the grass blades going over the cobblestone path, a few on the path as well. Just with single clicks, because if you drag it, it just makes a mess. Yeah, I wouldn't spend too long on it. At the end of the day, it's the building that you want to draw attention to rather than blades of grass, but it just gives you that little bit of realism. And that on its own probably isn't enough. It's just silhouettes of grass. Add some more. So I'm going to add highlights to them. So if you go into the colour picker again and pick a lighter shade, say this one's pretty good. That's all right. Turn on the layer, make it smaller, and then just sort of dab it a little bit in places. Make it a bit lighter actually. That's okay. It's going to give it that little bit of depth, I guess. I'm still not 100% happy with the colour of the grass, so what I'm going to do is go back into hue and saturation and play a bit with that a little bit. Much darker. All right, a bit better. And same with the hue and saturation on the house. Going to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to put lights in there in a second, so it might look a bit better after that. Oh, okay. Right. So next up, I'm going to add lights into the building, which is going to make it look make it stand out much more from the image, and make it look much more realistic as well. Get a new layer. I'll get a brush. Choose a very pale yellow, pretty close to white. Not quite. Choose a soft brush and make it really, really big. That's about right. Just going to dab it once. And same here. Alright. Now if I choose the blending mode and make it linear dodge add, it's going to make it look like it's glowing within the windows. Reduce the opacity a little bit as well, it doesn't need to be that. There we go. And if you want, you can add some stuff on the cobblestone path as well. That on its own isn't really enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer, make the brush much smaller, and draw light sources. So what you want to do is you want to make a bit of a more vibrant yellow. There we go. Highlight the areas that you want the lights to be in. So in this case, the windows, I guess. I'm just going to use the rectangular marquee tool for that one. There we go. And again, I'm going to choose the brush and just dab it in there like that. I might actually make it a little bit bigger. Same on the other side as well. Go. Just dab it in there. And again, I'm going to choose the blending mode to be linear add. The opacity looks pretty good actually, and that way it looks like there are actual lights in the building. Could even add them anywhere really. Say when I lamp in this window. Just going to dab it. There we go. Same one here. Sorted. Right, that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So I'm going to add the rest of the background that's going to be in front of the house now, which is just going to be done with trees. So in the folder again, there are 3 tree cutouts. Not going to need more than that. We're just going to copy them and sort of flip them about and transform them. So same as with the forest. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the thumbnail of the tree, holding control at the same time. It's going to select the entire image. I'm just going to fill it with black. There we go. And after that, you can delete the original image. Green, put it in front of the house. Looks not bad. Probably shouldn't be drawn out of the cobblestone. Oh well. Okay, just going to copy that over. Again, holding Alt over here. Might want to put it behind the building actually. That's looking okay. And you probably want to apply the same thing that we did to the background with playing with opacity, just seeing what works and what doesn't. Want when it comes to giving it a bit of depth. Another cutout, just do the same thing. There's a lot of repetition in here. What colour? Put it somewhere in front here, sort of in the foreground. You'll make the composition look a bit nicer. Like that. Just the opacity a little bit. Same here, I'm just going to add some more trees. Just the opacity of that one. Copy that over. Again. Again. So basically what we want to do with this image is just to draw the attention sort of towards the middle, which is why I'm filling these with sort of what looks like black spots. And you can sort of get rid of that just by reducing the opacity a little bit. This one and this one. Just to have them sort of merge with each other when it comes to sort of this area here. There we go. Right, gonna add some people in there as well with some shadows. There we go. They don't have to be silhouettes, just to differentiate them. I add a little bit of colour. I'm just gonna add a person there. The right scale, and it kind of stands out. It's not looking like it's actually a part of the image. So again, I'm going to use an adjustment layer. Should be the person. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to control and click on the thumbnail so that it selects the person. I just go in with a black brush and just to give it a little bit of sort of definition there. And add highlights as well. Like this, maybe make it linear dodge. Maybe not. Highlights where they would be normally. And just reduce the opacity of this. And going to add some people in the foreground as well. Walking towards the house. Same thing again. Control click it and then go in with a black brush. little definition. I'm going with highlights. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to add one more detail, which is smoke coming out of the chimney. A lot of details like that just makes it look a bit more realistic, I guess. Maybe. Rasterize it so that allows you to modify it, because it usually comes in as it's a smart object. Not really too sure what a smart object means, but just make it a little bit more subtle. There we go. Could probably add some shadows for the person as well. Just little details like that. I can spend forever doing it. Just again, gonna make it a bit more perspectival. Just dab it on there. It's very basic. Okay, and there we go, and that's our image. Is there any questions?
Perfect. So I think we'll give a couple of people a couple of minutes to see if they've got any questions and type them in.
Yeah, sure thing.
But thank you very much. That was brilliant. There's definitely a few things that I've picked up from that session that I've never heard of before. So it was the best way of learning new things.
Sites for contact people. I use there's a site called Non-Scandinavia. Let me see if I can share my my browser. Where is it? Yeah, so if you go on, get rid of that. Yeah, Non-Scandinavia. They've got silhouettes as well. So as you can see, I've got loads silhouettes, and they're pretty good. And the key thing is when you drop them into Photoshop. If I actually download one just now, see. Right, and if I drop them into Photoshop, they drop in without a background, which is quite good, because then you don't have to fuck about with sort of going in with a magic wand trying to remove the background and it looking a bit clunky. And they're pretty high quality as well, so they usually look pretty good.
Sure, you'll all join me in thanking Kuba for that, because it was really interesting. Definitely a few skills that we've picked up from that. But yeah, thanks for coming. if you keep an eye out on the Facebook page, we'll post a link for the next workshop. Next workshop will be on SketchUp. So I know it's getting to that time of year, deadlines and whatnot are starting to creep up. So between the sort of Photoshop, SketchUp, we'll have a look at that. So if you want to come along, you're more than welcome to. But, yeah, thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.